How much rolling stock? How many engines? What spare parts? How much oil? How many lathes? How many cutters? How many punching and shearing machines? What arrangements of signals would be necessary? How many lamps? How many points? How many trolleys? What amount of coal should be ordered? How much water would be wanted? How should it be carried? To what extent would its carriage affect the hauling power and influence all previous calculations? How much railway plant was needed? How many miles of rail? How many thousand sleepers? Where could they be procured at such short notice? How many fish plates were necessary? What tools would be required? What appliances? What machinery? How much skilled labor was wanted? How much of the class of labor available? How were the workmen to be fed and watered? How much food would they want? How many trains a day must be run to feed them and their escort? How many must be run to carry plant? How did these requirements affect the estimate for rolling stock? The answers to all these questions, and to many others with which I will not inflict the reader, were set forth by Lieutenant Girouard in a ponderous volume several inches thick, and such was the comprehensive accuracy of the estimate that the working parties were never delayed by the want even of a piece of brass wire. In any circumstances the task would have been enormous. It was, however, complicated by 5 important considerations. It had to be executed with military precautions. There was apparently no water along the line. The feeding of 2,000 plate layers in a barren desert was a problem in itself. The work had to be completed before the winter. And finally, the money voted was not to be outrun. The Sirdar attended to the last condition. Girouard was sent to England to buy the plant and rolling stock. 15 new engines and 200 trucks were ordered. The necessary new workshops were commenced at Halfa. Experienced mechanics were procured to direct them. 1,500 additional men were enlisted in the railway battalion and trained. Then the water question was dealt with. The reconnoitring surveys had reported that though the line was certainly good and easy for 110 miles, and, according to Arab accounts, for the remaining 120 miles, no drop of water was to be found, and only 2 likely spots for wells were noted. Camel transport was, of course, out of the question. Each engine must first of all haul enough water to carry it to railhead and back, besides a reserve against accidents. It was evident that the quantity of water required by any locomotive would continually increase as the work progressed and the distance grew greater, until finally the material trains would have 1/3 of their carrying power absorbed in transporting the water for their own consumption. The amount of water necessary is largely dependent on the grades of the line. The flat desert proved to be a steady slope up to a height of 1,600 feet above Halfa, and the calculations were further complicated. The difficulty had, however, to be faced, and 100 1,500-gallon tanks were procured. These were mounted on trucks and connected by hose, and the most striking characteristic of the trains of the Sudan Military Railway was the long succession of enormous boxes on wheels, on which the motive power of the engine and the lives of the passengers depended. The first spadeful of sand of the Desert Railway was turned on the first day of 1897, but until May, when the line to Kerma was finished, no great efforts were made, and only 40 miles of track had been laid. In the meanwhile the men of the new railway battalion were being trained. The plant was steadily accumulating. Engines, rolling stock, and material of all sorts had arrived from England. From the growing workshops at Wady Halfa the continual clatter and clang of hammers and the black smoke of manufacture rose to the African sky. The malodorous incense of civilization was offered to the startled gods of Egypt. All this was preparation, nor was it until the 8th of May that track laying into the desert was begun in earnest. The whole of the construction gangs and railroad staff were brought from Kerma to Wady Halfa, and the daring pioneers of modern war started on their long march through the wilderness, dragging their railway behind them, safe and sure road which infantry, cavalry, guns, and gunboats might follow with speed and convenience. It is scarcely within the power of words to describe the savage desolation of the regions into which the line and its constructors plunged. A smooth ocean of bright-coloured sand spread far and wide to distant horizons. The tropical sun beat with senseless perseverance upon the level surface until it could scarcely be touched with the naked hand, and the filmy air glittered and shimmered as over a furnace. Here and there huge masses of crumbling rock rose from the plain like islands of cinders in a sea of fire. Alone in this vast expanse stood Railhead, a canvas town of 2,500 inhabitants, complete with station, stores, post office, telegraph office, and canteen, and only connected with the living world of men and ideas by two parallel iron streaks, 3 feet 6 inches apart, growing dim and narrower in a long perspective until they were twisted and blurred by the mirage and vanished in the indefinite distance. Every morning in the remote nothingness there appeared a black speck growing larger and clearer, until with a whistle and a welcome clatter, amid the aching silence of ages, the material train arrived, carrying its own water and 2,500 yards of rails, sleepers, and accessories. At noon came another speck, developing in a similar manner into a supply train, also carrying its own water, food and water for the half-battalion of the escort and the 2,000 artificers and platelayers, and the letters, newspapers, sausages, jam, whiskey, soda water, and cigarettes which enabled the Briton to conquer the world without discomfort. And presently the empty trains would depart, reversing the process of their arrival, and vanishing gradually along a line which appeared at last to turn up into the air and run at a tangent into an unreal world. The life of the strange and lonely town was characterized by a machine-like regularity, born perhaps of the iron road from which it derived its nourishment. Daily at 3 o'clock in the morning the camp engine started with the bank parties. With the dawn the material train arrived, the plate-laying gangs swarmed over it like clusters of flies, and were carried to the extreme limit of the track. Every man knew his task, and knew too that he would return to camp when it was finished, and not before. Forthwith they set busily to work without the necessity of an order. 100 yards of material was unloaded. The sleepers were arranged in a long succession. The rails were spiked to every alternate sleeper, and then the great 80-ton engine moved cautiously forward along the unballasted track, like an elephant trying a doubtful bridge. The operation was repeated continually through the hours of the burning day. Behind the train there followed other gangs of plate-layers, who completed the spiking and ballasting process, and when the sun sank beneath the sands of the western horizon, and the engine pushed the empty trucks and the weary men home to the railhead camp, it came back over a finished and permanent line. There was a brief interval while the camp fires twinkled in the waist, like the lights of a liner in mid-ocean, while the officers and men chatted over their evening meal, and then the darkness and silence of the desert was unbroken till morning brought the glare and toil of another long day. So, week in, week out, the work went on. Every few days saw a further advance into the wilderness. The scene changed and remained unaltered, another yet the same. As Wady Halfa became more remote and Abu Hamed grew near, an element of danger, the more appalling since it was peculiar, was added to the strange conditions under which the inhabitants of Railhead lived. What if the Dervishes should cut the line behind them? They had 3 days' reserve of water. After that, unless the obstruction were removed and the traffic restored, all must wither and die in the sand, and only their bones and their cooking pots would attest the folly of their undertaking. By the 20th of July, 130 miles of line had been finished, and it became too dangerous to advance further until Abu Hamed had been cleared of the Dervish force. They were still 100 miles away, but camels travel fast and far, and the resources of the enemy were uncertain. It appeared that progress would be checked, but on the 7th of August, General Hunter, marching from Merawi along the river bank, attacked and took Abu Hamed, an operation which will be described